Well, I want to take you back to 1934. I wasn't there, honest. I really don't remember 1934. Frank was a farmer just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he decided that he wanted to invite some of the guys that he knew that were in business in town to come out for a prayer meeting. It was out in their pasture. There was a really nice spot, actually, out where there was a beautiful tree, a great shade tree. So they went out there and they started to pray that afternoon. There had been some businessmen in Charlotte that had been praying for revival there, but this meeting got much farther than any other prayer meeting had ever gotten before. They started to pray, and when they first started to pray, they said, Lord, would you do something bigger in Charlotte, in our generation, than you've ever done before? And as they prayed longer, their praying got bolder. And somebody said, Lord, listen, would you do something so powerful in Charlotte that it would affect our whole state in North Carolina? And somebody then began to pray, and as the prayer meeting continued, they got to the point where they were starting to pray, Lord, would you do something in this town that will have so much impact, it will affect this whole nation. Their praying didn't stop there. The prayer eventually escalated to say, Lord, would you do something so powerful here that would affect the whole world? What a prayer. What they could have never known was the answer to their prayer was in the barn. Frank's last name was Graham, and his son was Billy. And he was doing his chores in the barn as a 15-year-old kid, as he's been prayed that prayer. And he would become the answer to that prayer, as we all know. Preaching the gospel to more people face to face than anybody in the history of the Christian church. You realize that is kind of God's MO? He takes little things and does big things from little things. Have you ever noticed that? I mean, how would you have orchestrated the coming of God into this world? Well, you'd have done Rome, right? Jerusalem, at least. Bethlehem? Really? Bethlehem? Really? Where would you have him grow up? Well, you'd want him to be in the center of influence. At least grow up in the city of Jerusalem. Nazareth? I've been to Israel. Nazareth is way up here, way out in the boonies. It's like, I suppose they called them hillbillies. I don't know what they called people from Nazareth. All they did was they said nothing good ever came out of that town, that's for sure. Jesus did. Comes as a baby? Really? The Son of God, the conquering King, King of all kings, is going to come here as a baby? He's going to die a criminal's death on a cross? And then Jesus is going to come and he is going to start the most important movement in the history of the planet, upon which the salvation of the entire world depends, with 11 guys who were called by the Sanhedrin uneducated and ordinary men. You know what the Greek word is there? Idiotes. Guess which word we get from that? Bunch of idiots, they said. God does the biggest stuff from small beginnings. You know why? So he gets all the glory. There ain't no way to explain HowToLife if it's Jordan Whitmer. There's no human that could explain this. Jordan would be the first to tell you that. It's got to be God, or it can't be this. Not this much, this fast. I heard a gospel song, and the words go like this, and I wrote them down. It just said, let me see, it says, God's got a bigger thing going on than these little bitty eyes can see. That's the truth. God always has something bigger going on than the thing you can see. And these little bitty eyes can't see. And the older you are, the more you can see the tapestry that he was weaving with little threads back there somewhere. The backstory of this, just to give you an idea of how God was working in Jordan's life, Jordan's parents traveled with our On Eagles Wings team to many Indian reservations when he was a little guy. He was 6 years old, and he saw our team, which is all Native Americans, leading their generation of Native Americans to Christ, some of the hardest people in this country to lead to Christ, the first Americans. And he saw a couple 6-year-old boys that nobody was talking to. So he said, I'm going out there. He got out of the vehicle. He's not exactly a Native American, but he went out there. He's from the white bread tribe, like I am and you are. And he went out there, and he led 2 Indian boys to Christ because he wasn't going to wait till one of the team members got to him. That was Jordan's heart as a 6-year-old boy. They had to see you at the pole, the prayer thing they do in September at the high school, and I think maybe at the middle school. Jordan couldn't wait that long. What was it, 3rd grade, Jordan? Jordan said, we need to do it here. He sounded more like that. He didn't have the deep voice now. He said, let's go do it around. Let's go pray around the pole, the flagpole. So he couldn't wait. He was ahead of his time. We have to do this in 3rd grade. And I think he did it all the way through from that point on. And then then he started Gobs for God. You saw the sign? He said, we need to have some kind of a Bible club at school. And they gave him permission to do that, and that was Gobs for God. He went with our On Eagles Wings team as a young man and helped out as an intern one summer. And he watched as Native American young people broke through where nobody has broken through. The missionaries say nobody can reach the kids. Nobody can break through to them. The pastors, the native adults, their hearts are broken, but they say we can't do anything to reach them. They can't, there's no way, nothing's ever worked. And Jordan was there and watched as Native Americans went to their own generation and just told their hope stories of what Jesus could do. And saw how Native young people responded. Hundreds every summer. Now, one of the principles of God's Word, and actually church history, is this. Almost every great movement of God has started with one person with a broken heart. It may explode from there, but it starts with one person who allows their heart to be broken with what breaks God's heart. Jordan's heart was broken for his generation. He said, my tribe's at Harrison High School. They're not on an Indian reservation. And why can't we reach our generation for Christ? His heart was broken for his generation, and all of our hearts should be broken for his generation. It is true, there's never been kids in this country this lost. They're here in school now. They're here now. And they are, there's been a history of teenagers in this country that has been a sad one. If you go back to the 50s, any of you want to sing a song for us? Anyone, we want to do some oldies? We could do some oldies right now. Of course, I wouldn't know them, but yeah, I would. I know I could finish all the lyrics. Back in the 50s, kids lost their innocence. As TV began and the movies began to portray more and more, kids had innocence, but boy, they started to lose it in the 1950s and they've never gotten it back. It's gotten worse and worse. Go to the 1960s. If you remember the 1960s, that's when young people lost their authority. In the 1960s, during all the rioting and all the challenging of every authority, parents had no authority at home, teachers have no authority at school, no one can tell me anything, and God has no authority in heaven. And they lost authority and boundaries, and they've never gotten it back. This is cumulative. By the young people of the 1970s, young people lost their sense of, and I made up a word, lovedness. It was the age of what they called latchkey homes, and more divorce, kids coming home to broken families. And they lost their sense of being loved and being safe. Get to the 1980s, and the suicide rate among teenagers is soaring, and now they've lost their hope. Once again, This is cumulative. So every generation gets all of this. By the 1990s, there's not a whole lot more left to lose. So in the 1990s, they lose control. And binge drinking and binge drugging and all kinds of sexual experimentation starts to go crazy in the 1990s. Now they're out of control. And now we get to the kids of the 2000s. And I'll lump that together and just simply say, now this generation, living with lost innocence, lost authority, lost lovedness, lost hope, and lost control, have lost their anchors. They have no anchor. Not the family, it's broken. Not the church, they don't trust institutional religion at all. Their relationships don't last. You can delete a friend with one push of a button, one click on the internet. You can be deleted out of someone's life. People break up engagements by putting a new status the next morning. I'm single today. You are? I thought we were engaged. Relationships are unanchored now, adrift. They have no anchors. They are extremely lost. This has broken Jordan's heart for his generation. I will say this about Generation Z. They are passionate. This generation is passion in search of a cause. But they have no cause. Nothing worth being passionate about. They're just passionate. They would love to have a cause. Now, because we live in the age of social media, and because Jordan has made it a point to master the use of social media, which baffle some of us in this room, the word of what happened with HowToLife in Harrison, Arkansas, a little thing, it wasn't little here, it was big for this town, but Harrison, Arkansas isn't exactly the center of the universe, is it? Not exactly a power center. Be more like Nazareth or Bethlehem. But God decided to do a big thing, again, from a little thing that men would consider little. But he's a big God, and he gets all the glory that way. And so what happened here, through the power of social media, could spread around the world. Young people all over could hear about what happened here. And God lit a match in Harrison, Arkansas. How long ago, Jordan? 4 years ago? 4? 4 years ago, God lit a match that is becoming a spiritual wildfire across the country and around the world. And it started here. I believe there are people in this room right now who have prayed for the young people of this community for a long time. Your prayers were answered that first night at the college with all those 700 young people there in subsequent events. But little did you know, any more than the prayer meeting at Frank's farm under the trees in the pasture could have imagined how far the answers to their prayers would go. And so you're seeing perhaps the answers to a long time praying on your own part. You know this is a movement of God, don't you? There's no other explanation for it. Do you know how we know it's God? Because it has been what they would call scientifically spontaneous combustion. How does Jordan know anybody in France? How does he know anybody in England? How does he know anybody in many of the states that we're in? But what's happened is this. There are Jordan hearts all over the country and all over the world. They're a tiny minority, but they're a powerful minority. They're God's minority in Generation Z. And they realize that the only ones that will be listened to by this generation will have to come from their generation. And that's the unique vision of HowToLife. I've been in ministry a long time. I've been all over the world, preached the gospel, I think, on every continent but Antarctica, because penguins don't have souls, as far as we know. But I've seen God working many places. Been all over this country so many times. I think I know a work of God when I see one. And I don't say this as an outside observer to someone who was not related to me at all. I would say, man, when I heard about this, and finding these like hearts all over the country, and now increasingly all over the world, God knows where they are, because God's broken their hearts too, like he broke Jordan's. And God's bringing this fellowship of the broken heart together to reach the most unreached generation, because they're that way all over the world. And God is truly on the move in this generation through young people. And so God finds them, they find this movement going on other places, and they go, oh my goodness, because you know what these young people are? They are a burden in search of a vehicle. You know what I'm saying? They've got the burden, they don't know what to do with it. Jordan does. These young people you saw in that video, they know. They found out what to do. Tell their hope stories to their generation, and their generation will want their Jesus. Probably wouldn't listen to an evangelist. Probably wouldn't listen to a pastor. Very well might not listen to me. But they'll listen to each other. And the simplicity of it is so easily reproducible. Makes it able to grow much faster, because it has grown not organizationally, but organically. So I'm excited to see this. I've had a chance to speak to these leaders at international gathering and spend time with them, and they're an amazing, boy, anybody would love to have these young people in there, whatever the thing they're doing. But you know, the Bible may have talked about this, not specifically about HowToLife, but Acts 2:17 tells us what's going to happen before Jesus comes back. It says this: in the last days, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Now hold on a second. God's Spirit has been working for 2,000 years here, since Jesus came. But he said this one's going to be universal. This is going to affect everybody. I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. It'll be different than anything that's ever happened before. And your sons and daughters will prophesy. And your young men will see visions. And your old men, hooray, we made the cut. We made the verse. And your old men will dream dreams. You know what I think that says? The last great thing God's going to do on this planet before Jesus comes back, young people are going to be in the head of it. They're going to be leading it. They will not be back here watching adults do it. Adults will be back here watching them do it. This is a glimpse of the last great move of God on this planet. And on a much larger scale, it may look like this. Because HowToLife is so scalable, so reproducible, so organic, it can happen fast, it can happen anywhere. That there are young people with the same broken heart. We've only seen the small beginning of what God could do through all of this. And I think when it says the old men will dream dreams, what it's saying is that there'll be an older generation who will be empowering and be cheerleaders for the young people who are leading the charge. So there's a place for all of us in that last great plan of God. I want to tell you something to pray for. We're going to gather around Jordan, and we're going to have a commissioning prayer for him very shortly. I've started, Karen and I were involved in the beginning of ministries from nothing 2 or 3 times in our life. And I know the kind of faith it requires. And Jordan's experiencing, he won't talk much about it, but he's experiencing an experience that I know too well, that the work of God begins and it accelerates incredibly, but the support for it financially doesn't move nearly as fast. And in many ways, HowToLife has gone as far as it can go with the resources they have. Jordan's move that we're going to pray for him about here in just a few minutes is strategic, to put him in a place where there will be more resources of all kinds, people, volunteers, access to cities very quickly. World's busiest airport, or the country's busiest airport, is in Atlanta. But that financial foundation has to catch up. Jordan will never tell you this. He doesn't even talk to me about it, but he's made many sacrifices to do this. Many times he doesn't get paid. He's been selling puppies at the Walmart parking lot. No, that's really not true. I did make that up. So I have these little brain fruit things that go on and they just go through quickly. It's over with now. But they've done everything they could do without money. Now it's going to take some. It's going to take some people, a staff. It's going to take some staff people. It's going to take a lot more. And so I ask you to pray for that. Your prayers will be decisive in the future of HowToLife. Did you hear what I said? Your prayers will be decisive in the future of HowToLife. As you pray, what Jordan will experience will be, he will live the answers to the prayers you pray. You won't see the answers, but you'll be the reason for the answers, humanly speaking. We really need to cover this movement. I don't know of another thing like it for Gen Z. And Jordan has been invited to some national conferences and some national platforms to speak at his young age, simply because nobody knows who to have talk about Gen Z. They turn to him. Nobody knows what to do with them. So we need to really pray that God will build a bunch of us underneath these young men and women. After all, when the first missionaries went out, Paul and Barnabas, they had a base called Antioch. And Acts 13 talks about how the Holy Spirit called them, and they left from there to take the gospel around the then known world. But there was a town that started them. There was a launch pad called Antioch that stayed with them and prayed for them and supported them, and they came back and reported back to them. But it started in Antioch. It started in Harrison. We are the Antioch of a movement of God that has mushroomed under God's blessing in a short 4 years. I can't imagine what the next 4 years are going to be like and beyond. It was 1925, Nome, Alaska. Nome, Alaska at that time was a very remote location, far from, they had one doctor there. That was the only medical help they had. And all of a sudden, a case of diphtheria was spotted in Nome. It started to spread pretty rapidly. The doctor communicated all the way back to Washington, D.C. to the federal government and said, if we don't get serum here quickly, this has the potential to kill 75% of the children in this entire region of Alaska. It's 1925. How do you get something to Nome, Alaska quickly? Something upon which lives depend. Well, they got the serum by train to Nianu, Alaska, 640 miles from Nome. That's as far as it could get by train. Now it was up to the dog teams and the guys who run them, called the mushers. A little problem. The Iditarod Trail, now you've heard of the Iditarod. Today it's a sporting event. Not back then. It was the mail trail through that part of Alaska. By the Iditarod Trail, it took 25 days to get to Nome, and by then it would be far too late for the serum. Well, they started out in what was, they said, perhaps the fiercest winter anybody could remember in Alaska, 1925. The temperature dropped to 65 below at times. And then a monster blizzard came as the dog teams kept pressing and the mushers kept them pressing on. And they'd go as far as they could, and then a new team would take over, and then a new team would take over. And they kept pushing, and they pushed, and they pushed through the worst nightmarish conditions. And at 5:30 a.m. on January 30th, the last dog team came down the main street of Nome with the serum. And the 25-day trip took 5.5 days. And hundreds of lives were saved by an all-out effort to get what would save them there in time. 150 sled dogs, 20 different mushers. No one team could have ever done it. No one driver could have ever done it. It took a whole team, a whole relay team, to save those lives. We have a generation that's desperately in need of a serum called the gospel. The only thing that can save them. And it will take a team to get it to them. These guys can take that final lap, perhaps, and get the serum to the young people. But it'll be people like us who help them get there. We're on the LifeSaving Team. And the race is on as to who will own this generation. Right now, they are owned by the darkness. We believe they can be a Jesus generation.